even the most detached symbolic ideologies, institutions, scientific theories, what have you, ultimately are connected to the most fundamental perception phase. And this is something that we forget quite often, how embodied we are. Ideologies always become concrete in some situations. Ideas govern people in their everyday life. They govern how they perceive things. If you have a certain kind of ideology, you're going to perceive things in a certain way. You're going to find different things salient in your experience based on the ideas that you entertain. So all of this is connected. And the 4 phases is a tool to conceptualize those different levels or phases of our experience, to have a better grip and understanding of what's going on, how things relate to one another. Let's talk about the 4 phases. So what are the 4 phases? The 4 phases describe and conceptualize the development or growth of semiosis, the action of signs, or sign action. It can be divided in 4 phases. The most fundamental phase is perception phase. The next comes experience phase, then comes understanding phase, and the most developed and the most abstract one is the sharing phase, which is also fully symbolic. Now, right off the bat, we should think this as a linear process, where we are first here in the perception, then we move to here, experience phase, and then we move here, and so on. It's not a linear process. It's a continuous back and forth process where we jump around from phase to phase, and in reality it's a very messy kind of thing. So don't think it too linearly. Don't think it as a too rigid kind of logic where everything goes like in discrete steps in a very logical manner. You know, semiotic logic is vague. There is always fluctuations, there are motion, there are continuity, fluidity, back and forth, loops, circularity, and stuff like that. It's constantly moving. Think about your experience. You know, just reflect back on your experience, because that is semiosis. What's your experience like? It's not linear. It's not logical in the strict deductive sense, by no means. No, it's vague. Sometimes you have no idea what's going on. You have to guess all the time what's going on. Things are unclear. There's uncertainty. You lose yourself sometimes. And stuff like that happens all the way. It's vague. Semiosis is also vague. The phases are vague. So another thing is that there's a sort of a logical dependency between these phases, meaning that the most fundamental phase can be there alone, so to say, whereas then experience phase contains the perception phase. Now, think about these terms: experience, perception. It makes sense. If you're experiencing something, you necessarily perceive something, right? In order to experience something, there must be some kind of a perception. Now, it doesn't have to be real, it can be a dream, but dream is nevertheless some kind of perception. When we move to the understanding phase, now just think about these words. You don't have to understand what this phase means. These words will tell you. In order to understand something, you have to first experience it. And in order to experience it, you have to perceive it. So there is this logical nestedness between the phases. Understanding contains experience and perception. Now we move to the sharing phase. You're sharing information, you're sharing meaning which presupposes that you have some kind of understanding of that what you're sharing. Now, it doesn't have to be complete, it doesn't have to be even correct, but you have some kind of understanding, which requires that you have some kind of experience of that thing, whatever it may be, which in turn requires that you must have some kind of perception of that thing. So sharing contains understanding, experience, and perception. So there is this kind of a logical nestedness in the phases. But let's go to the phases themselves. Let's start by perception phase. Now, perception phase, is very fundamental. It's unconscious. There is no real information in that phase. It's about the most fundamental contact with reality. It's a very hard phase to really understand because it's unconscious. It happens so fast and so easily in our experience that it's hard to recognize. So perception phase is about abstracting something from the qualitative continuum. Okay, what does that mean? What is the qualitative continuum? Well, this is a thing, again, in the semiotic mindset. This is a philosophical idea that needs a bit elaboration. Modern philosophy pretty much begins from the point that what we are perceiving are individual particular things. They may be particles or packets of data, bits, ones and zeros. They may be singular ideas or singular discrete sensations. The point is that they are individual, particular. They are discrete things. So we visually we could think of it as that we are perceiving a massive amount of individual particles. Like we could say that we are perceiving atoms. Why we then can perceive objects like computers, camera, window, door, stuff like that. How do we recognize stuff as some things? And that is why, that is because, according to modern philosophy, we synthesize these particles to form sort of general concepts. Like, that is a car. We take these individual particles and put them together to form the perception of car. But our perception, this is the point. In modern philosophy, our perceptions fundamentally are synthesized from discrete bits. They are composites of smaller parts. And who does this combining? It's our mind. Our mind combines them and then we perceive them. It's unconscious, but that is the process. Now, the problem with this view is that, is this car really real? This combination must be or is in some way fundamentally arbitrary. Because we could do it in another way. Why combine just these particles? Why don't we combine these particles? Why left that one particle out? Why don't we take that too into the combination? Where do the borders go? Why just these? What it's a mess. It's a mess, and these decisions become arbitrary. And there's then we have lots of philosophical problems to solve about meaning, about arbitrariness, about the relative concepts, about universals and stuff like that. It gets really complicated real fast, and we have massive problems, and that's what we have been trying to figure out for the at least past at least past 400 years, but longer, even longer than that. And we don't have an answer. We don't know. Now, this is a simplification, so philosophers out there, you can leave comments where you correct me. Please do that. Now, the semiotic mindset, the semiotic worldview has a very, radically different starting point. We are saying that the world is not discrete. The world is continuous. It's a one big continuum. This continuum is qualitative. It's full of qualities. And what our perception, in our perception process, what we are doing, we are not combining particles to form something coherent, some kind of synthesis, some kind of combination. No, we are seeing it all, like the whole like we could conceptualize that we see just a screen of qualities, and it's full of possibilities. There is, we could do almost anything with this. It's like, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. It's buzzing. It's fluctuating. It's a magnificent thing. But we have to choose something. We cannot just admire the qualitative continuum. We must choose something in order to structure our action. And that is done unconsciously. This is a very mysterious process of how we choose from that immense amount of possibilities. But we do. And that's what's happening in the perception phase. We see the whole continuum, we see the whole screen, and then something particular, something salient, something forceful actualizes, catches our attention, and we become focused on that thing. And that's what's happening in the perception phase. We are abstracting something from the qualitative continuum to be our focus, to be our object of inquiry, to be our sort of an anchor point in our upcoming action. That's the perception phase. This sounds very philosophical, very abstract, so what on earth this means in my experience? Well, as I said a little bit earlier, this is it's hard to get into, really, to the perception phase, because it's so automatic, it's unconscious. But in situations where you are faced with a massive, unexpected and surprising shock, there is pretty much something like perception phase going on, because you are trying to make sense what on earth is going on a very fundamental level. Like if you hear suddenly a big explosion, you don't even have thoughts in your mind, really. You're just like watching and trying to abstract from that qualitative screen something that you could detach and look at. In those kinds of experiences, in experiences of total confusion, like some kind of psychotic state or psychedelic experience, there is something like the perception phase going on. You have no idea what's going on. You are trying to find something to look at. You're trying to find something to be focused on. You are completely lost. You have no anchor point. You're just floating in this sea of qualities, then you are in the perception phase, I would say. So that's a very fundamental aspect of our experience, but it's completely necessary. So that's the perception phase. Now, experience phase is more familiar to us. It is our personal experience. It's the phase when we have abstracted or detached something from this continuum, and it has become a sort of a clear, something that we can focus on, and we can further inquire what is this thing, what it's doing, what kind of behavior it has, inquire the qualities a bit more precisely, and we begin to gain information about the world. So if in the perception phase we just pick up something. In the experience phase we further inquire that something. So what's happening in the experience phase is that we gain information about the object of inquiry, which is then a sign, by continuously separating and focusing on the difference between the object or the sign and the qualitative continuum there on the background. So we're looking at something and recognizing its boundaries and then the stuff that isn't that thing. So we are able to better inquire what that thing is. It's also sort of a very personal experience. This is more of a sociological point of view to this these phases. I had made actually a video about this, a sort of a sociological interpretation of these phases. Nevertheless, I think experience phase is somewhat personal. It is about being in some kind of situation, being embodied in a concrete, unique situation right here, right now. It's your experience right now, like how it feels to be present in this moment is the experience phase. And this is a phase when you can see how these are terms from John Vervaeke, where your salience landscape, I believe, is changing. So you're changing your focus. You're focusing here, so that's on the foreground and everything else is on the background. Now you're focusing there, so that thing comes to the foreground and everything else goes to the background and so on. You can see how you're focusing on individual things. Now the next phase is understanding phase, where again this comes from the semiotic mindset, where we understand the habits, the pattern, the regularities, tendencies, or laws. These all mean the same thing basically. What are the tendencies that are governing and guiding the behavior of this object which has become salient, which is our interest in this moment? So no longer we are sort of focused on the object itself, like learning about what this object is, what kind of qualities it has. Now we are sort of taking a step back. Our mind is going higher. Metaphorically, we are now interested in what kind of tendency is guiding this object. What is the pattern of this object? And this allows us to anticipate the behavior of the object, to make predictions how that object is going to behave in the future. And this is why understanding phase is about skills, very much. When you have a skill, You have understanding of the regularities guiding some situation. You can fluidly move through concrete situation because you know the patterns, and you can participate with these patterns, which allows you to move skillfully, fluidly, and without interruptions in your actions, without surprises in your action. And this is understanding. So notice now the point with the four phases. These are, I forgot to say it, the four phases of consciousness. These are different places for your mind to be in. These are kind of four different mindsets. So if the perception phase was like the mindset of a total confusion, like I have no idea what's going on, then experience phase is like the mindset of you're really inquiring something particular, really, really intriguingly, or you are feeling your personal experience. You're feeling very present in the moment. And understanding phase is about, seeing the patterns, seeing the regularities, pulling back a bit to see, oh, there's this pattern, there's this regularity guiding these things. Oh, I see. It's kind of this kind of a mindset. And the feeling of understanding phase is more general. You're taking more into account. You have some sort of in experience phase. You're quite narrow in your experience. You're narrowed down to something salient, something individual, and something salient. Whereas in understanding phase, it opens more. It opens to understand also, a little bit like the future, like what is there to anticipate, what is there to expect. So it's not only this moment, it's also looking a little bit into the future in a sense. And so understanding phase is very much about forming a habit of interacting with the world. And these habits, this is a very important point when we move to the sharing phase. It's important to notice how these habits are context dependent. So a skill applies in some context. It's not universal. John Vervaeke makes this point as well. I'm a good swimmer, but now it is not the right time to apply that swimming skill. It's not the right context. So that skill is not universal in the sense. The understanding phase, these patterns governing these situations, they are always attached to some kind of some particular context. They are not universal or context independent. But as we move to the sharing phase, there happens this kind of a detachment. Because now we're talking about symbols, and symbols are somewhat detached, somewhat context independent, and this enables very interesting things. So the sharing phase is where language, which is comprised of symbols, every word is a symbol, institutions, ideologies, religions, all these kind of symbolic things, mythologies, all these things reside. That's their locus in this sharing phase. And sharing phase is about sharing information, sharing meaning through symbols. That's what sharing phase is about. And I'm now sharing. I'm sharing information. I'm sharing meaning with you through language, which is comprised of symbols. But this is context independent in a sense, because you're in different context, you're in different time, you're in the future, but still this makes sense what I'm doing here, because it's all about sharing. So there's this kind of a detachment. Or think about words, just normal words, like the word dog. a common example. Dog. It means dogs. It means the animal of dog. Pretty much anywhere, you know. I can say it now, dog, and you understand what I mean. I can say it tomorrow. I can say it in a completely different context, and you most certainly will think about a four-legged animal called a dog. So it's context independent. Whereas if we think about the understanding phase, which is more about the habits governing some situation, and yeah, I forgot to say, like our social norms and cultural conventions are pretty much in the understanding phase. For example, in restaurants, there are certain social norms guiding that situation, how you should behave in restaurants. And if you don't behave, if you aren't guided by those tendencies, by those norms, people get confused. It breaks the action, it interrupts the flow of action. This can be seen, you know, I really like these examples of kind of a shock comedy, like Tom Green or Eric Andre, who break these social norms constantly, you know, just in an absurd way. And people just like have no idea what's going on, because that social norm is so utterly destroyed that they are like almost I think that they are on the perception phase, like, what is this happening? What's going on? And it's just like complete breakdown of the business as usual going on in our society. That is actually quite a good example of the phases. But understanding phase, it's always context dependent. But the symbolic things, they are not context dependent, you know. Think about our institutions or ideologies. They are very much universal. They are not, you know, tied to some particular context. No, you know, ideology or religion, it sort of permeates everything. It's like controls and is part of everything in our lives. So there's a sort of a difference. And this detachment of the symbolic makes possible the emergence of this symbolic realm, you could say. Now, what is this symbolic realm? Well, it's sort of the realm of discourse. It's a realm of ideas, in a sense. When you are debating, when you're having a deep philosophical conversation, you're changing ideas, you're sharing meaning. And that is, or our experience or our way to conceptualize that is somewhat detached from this concrete situation. It is somewhat autonomous. You know, it's no wonder that, you know, we have this idea of ideal world, you know, in the style of Plato, because it really does feel like that, you know. And to contrast, you know, the understanding phase and sharing phase. Understanding phase about, you know, the practical habits, context-dependent habits. Like, you know, culture is pretty much context. There's a lot of context-dependent habits in culture. You know, the way we greet one another, the way we behave in certain cultural contexts. And when you go abroad, you will become very, very conscious of these differences. Oh, you didn't do, oh, we do this, but you do it very differently. Oh, you shouldn't do this here, stuff like that. And these are all kind of context-dependent cultural conventions. And therefore, if a culture dies, you know, ancient culture, it cannot really be reborn, because these kind of cultural conventions, it's pretty much tacit knowledge. You know, it's not, you know, written. Most of it isn't written, and I think can't be written down. It's not symbolic knowledge in a sense. It's embodied knowledge. It's knowledge through practicing, knowledge gained through the participation with these tendencies, regulating and governing these various situations. It's like you cannot learn to ride a bike by reading a book. you have to ride a bike. You have to be participating with these laws, these tendencies in order to understand them. That's the same with culture. You cannot really be part of some culture only by reading about that culture. You have to participate with it. And participation with some tendencies, with something, is always about the understanding phase. Understanding phase could be almost be renamed to a participation phase, almost. That's like the main thing in that phase. Whereas the sharing phase, being symbolic, it's no longer about the concrete, like dynamical, embodied participation with something. You are playing with ideas. And of course, you are participating with these ideas. And ideologies are guiding people. But they are, in a different sense, detached. It's not the same. That's the point. And it's hard to explain this. It's not the same. I hope you have the same intuition. It's not the same. To have a conversation, it's on a higher level. The participation is on a higher level than the participation in some concrete habit. And it's detached. That's why we have literature. It's detached. You can read a book anywhere you want. You can speak about things that are not present through symbols. And that is a very interesting phenomenon, and something we must talk about in the future more, because this is very interesting. Nevertheless, this is one of the main points with the phases. We cannot be distracted by this abstractness, this detachment too much, because it's not really detached. Fundamentally, it's still connected to the most fundamental phase, the perception phase. Think about this. You're now watching this video. I'm speaking to you using symbols, so we are sharing information. So it's a sharing phase, quite obviously. But there are some habits guiding this situation. There is a certain style of making these YouTube videos that is governing the way I set up this thing here. There is your experience of this, how it relates to you, which is about the experience phase. This video is hopefully salient to you right now. It's your focus right now. But ultimately, you're perceiving. You're perceiving something. You're perceiving sound. You're perceiving visual sensations, which are not discrete. There's a lot of things you could be focusing on. There's this whole qualitative continuum open to you with all of its possibilities. But this is the possibility you decided to realize. I'm grateful for that. But the point is this. Even the most detached symbolic ideologies, institutions, scientific theories, what have you, ultimately are connected to the most fundamental perception phase. And this is something that we forget quite often, how embodied we are, how in some context we are. We are always embodied in some particular situation. Ideologies always become concrete in some situations. Ideas govern people in their everyday life. They govern how they perceive things. If you have a certain kind of ideology, you're going to perceive things in a certain way. You're going to find different things salient in your experience based on the ideas that you entertain. So all of this is connected. And the 4 phases is a tool to conceptualize those different levels or phases of our experience, to have a better grip and understanding of what's going on, how things relate to one another, how these ideologies govern certain kinds of situations where certain kinds of experience of certain kinds of people are happening, where they find different things salient, where ultimately, fundamentally, they are perceiving something. These are the 4 levels of our existence. These are the 4 phases of consciousness. A very insightful tool. I think this is a very helpful tool for us. It's insightful. It gives us information about our experience, about the society we live in, and it can be used to everything. And that's the point you have to remember. You have the semiotic mindset. You have the semiotic worldview, meaning that everything in our universe is semiosis. Everything is semiosis. So these 4 phases are to be found everywhere. This tool can be used to anything. It's a powerful tool. It's a powerful tool. Now, most obviously, we use it to ourselves, because that's something that we are familiar with, our own experience. And that's also very insightful, a very good place to use it. But it's not, by no means, the only place. But pedagogically, I found that it's a good place to start. Furthermore, again, as I said in the beginning of this video, I just can't share these ideas with you. It is enough that we all are here in the sharing phase, sharing meaning. I tell you these things. I tell you what the phases are, and now you understand the phases. No. You have to apply this tool to your experience. You have to contemplate. You have to meditate on it. You have to sit down and really, okay, now perception phase, and really try to see the world as you were in a perception phase. Do not focus on anything. Try just to see the qualitative screen, because all of the time you are actualizing possibilities, because that's unconscious. You have to. Otherwise you couldn't do anything. But try to get that mindset of of possibility, of potentiality, of continuity, the perception phase. But you have to the point is this: you have to contemplate it. You have to meditate on it. You have to do that work. You have to practice these 4 phases in order for them to be a fruitful and applicable and useful tool for your thinking. It doesn't come like that automatically. No. You have to practice this. It's a skill. It's a skill like playing an instrument, or learning to ride a bike, or playing sports. You can't just read on those things. You just can't just hear people talk about riding a bike. You have to ride a bike. You have to learn to ride a bike in order to understand what bike riding is. Same thing. In order to learn the 4 phases, you have to practice this. Practice experience phase. What is salient to you? Where is my focus? That comes to the foreground. Everything else is background. That comes to the foreground. Everything else is on the background. Okay, how it feels to be present. I'm here. What I'm feeling. What's that? That's the experience phase. Understanding phase. What is guiding this situation? What is guiding this what is this context? What habits are active right now? What is governing this situation? How I should behave in this situation? Because most of the time we are in a social situation with certain social norms and stuff like that. But you have sort of as I said, you take a step back. You find those patterns. You find those tendencies. What's governing this thing? How is this situation, this concrete event or circumstances, how is this constructed? What are the powers? What are the forces guiding the behavior? You're in a shop, a supermarket. People are not doing what they want, in a sense. No. They are obeying the rules. They are walking in a certain style. They are interacting in a certain style. They are doing things in the same manner. Everybody is behaving more or less the same. There are certain rules governing the situation. When you think about those rules, you are in the understanding phase. And of course, another side of that coin, if you're participating with some kind of rules, some kind of norms or tendencies, and think about that participation, that's also the feeling of the understanding phase. Sharing phase. Speaking, language, discourse, symbols, information, meaning, it's a very common place to us to be. You're listening to a podcast when you're walking, listening to radio, watching news, watching TV. It's pretty much sharing phase. You are not thinking about your personal experience so much, like your embeddedness in some situation. No, you're very absent-minded when you're listening to podcasts and walking to work or whatever. No. You're not actively perceiving anything. You're quite like, you have no idea what's going on. Like you're driving a car on a highway and then you realize you have paid no attention to the traffic at all. No, you're listening radio. So these things are, and this is the point again, these things are happening there in the background. When you're listening to radio or podcast while you're driving, let's say, you're still perceiving, you're still experiencing something salient, you're still understanding all the traffic rules guiding the situation. But on top of that, you are listening to radio and information and meaning is shared with you symbolically. So that's like the sharing phase. But yeah, there's a lot more to be said about the 4 phases. This is just, scratching the surface. I just wanted to make this video so you have another medium of information sharing, of meaning sharing, because not all of us are readers, and I think it's good to also speak about these things in a different format. I think it's very helpful, and it is just different, So if you're still watching the video, maybe there's 3 or 4 of you watching this thing right now, I would certainly love to hear your thoughts of how this relates to the text. Like, what's the experience like of reading versus watching or hearing, this elaboration on the 4 phases. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your experience with this stuff, as said earlier. I want to hear what you find easy, what you find easy to understand, what you find difficult to understand. What are the things that you're confused about? Do you have any questions about this stuff? I would love to answer those questions because, I don't know how this sounds to you, because these things are quite familiar to me. I've been thinking these things so much that it's hard to remember how it was when I first heard them. But you can just give me feedback so we can, further develop this thing, further develop this fluidity of this sharing. But I think that's enough about the 4 phases. This video is quite long already. So I hope to see you again next time. Remember to subscribe to the Substack and Twitter and this channel. And I wish you good sign hunting. See you next time.